Hi, 2001 did not lack in interesting games, and I'm back with another few for you to learn or reminisce about. So let's not waste any more of your time with this unnecessary intro and jump straight in. Codename Outbreak is a first and third-person sci-fi shooter that was not very popular upon its release, most likely because it came out as a budget title and these were often of a questionable quality. I've done no research on the subject though, so take it with a pinch of salt and not as an absolute truth. It came from the devs that later made the Stalker games though, so despite not being well known, if you're a fan of the genre, it's definitely a title for you to take an interest in, as it's rather good. It also does few things in a pretty unique way, so that's as good as a reason as any to give it a chance. Sometime in the early 21st century, a meteor rushing for our planet is discovered. It's too big to be dealt with before it hits the planet, well, at least with the tech that we have access by then, so we're left in a situation when we know that it will bullseye somewhere and just need to figure out where. And when we do, because we naturally do, we evacuate surrounding cities knowing that they may face significant losses otherwise. Fortunately for all of us, despite the meteor being unstoppable, it's also not big enough to wipe out humanity. And it hits eventually, but the casualties are fortunately minimal. So a team of scientists is sent to study the crater and meteor remains. And as soon as they arrive on the location, any contact with them is lost. Further investigation reveals that the meteor didn't come alone and brought an unwanted group of passengers with it. Namely alien parasites that quickly took over the scientists, morphing them into murderous monsters. This requires a swift and strong military response to be dealt with, and it's where the game begins. Unlike most other shooters, Codename Outbreak actually leaves you in control of a duo of soldiers, one that you control directly and the other that you can issue orders to. These orders are very basic and relegated to hold position, cover me, hold fire and fire at will really, but the AI is surprisingly decent and you don't ever feel like the virtual companion of yours is more of a problem than you have to keep in check than a support that you're counting on. I mean, they're not groundbreaking in any way, but they're not gonna hamper your progress or make the game unnecessarily more difficult. The gimmick is that you can switch between these two soldiers at will, which is definitely not something that was common in shooters back in the day. Interestingly enough, there are no unique weapons in the game and just the one that you're carrying. But it's a futuristic sci-fi inspired rifle that has numerous shooting modes, each of them corresponding to a typical for the genre different piece of armament. So you can switch it into a machine gun, sniper, silent laser or even a rocket launcher modes among others and use it as such. Naturally, provided that you have appropriate ammo for the chosen mode that is. The game is composed out of 14 alien blasting missions, most of which are rather big and take place in both outdoor and indoor locations. In fact, if you can see a building or a point of interest somewhere in the background, chances are that it's something that you can actually get to in the game. Codename Outbreak is not the best shooter you've played and not even the best for the year, but it's definitely a unique game and a very solid take on the genre, so if you're a fan, make sure not to miss it. Mech Commander 2 is an RTS game, but since it relies on mechs, it's a bit different than what you're used to with the genre. Well, unless you've played the first game, because then it'll be nothing new. But if you haven't, let me explain. First of all, you're in control of mechs and not soldiers, tanks or whatever else you usually are in typical real-time strategies. Which means that you never get as many units as you would in other similar games and have to rely more on upgrades of what you have already, rather than a constant production of new ones in astronomical numbers. So no Zerg rushes in this one and no machine gun production lines either. In fact, you're never in control of more than just a few units at the time. Secondly, each mech is really a combination of a machine and a pilot. And these pilots come with their own specialties, sometimes more than one. The skills are a true game changer as they can significantly increase the performance of the machine that the pilots are assigned to. And lastly, all mechs are upgradable, meaning that you can refit them between the missions with different components, changing their layouts to make them even deadlier than they already are. Well, you can even just straight up purchase better mechs if you can afford them, but I wouldn't count on it on being something you'll do all the time, and rather as something that will happen when you save up for them. Most missions are either of the go and kill type or go and capture one. So the constant is that going bit, and whether you will kill enemies when you get quote-unquote there, or kill and capture a particular location, is down to what you're told to do. I'm obviously exaggerating and the objectives can range from this by a little, but during grand majority of the game that's precisely what you'll be doing. It may sound like a rather repetitive formula, and truth be told it kinda is, but tell me, what RTS isn't? And also, the game makes sure to keep the conditions interesting, changing the time of the day, weather and locations often, and most of all, the story that is told between the missions is very well crafted and acted out, definitely written by someone who's intimate with the Battletech universe. I'm sure that most of you who've been watching these videos of mine for a while know that I'm neither a mech fanatic nor an avid RTS gamer either. So I'm not the best person to explain in detail all that the Mech Commander 2 has to offer, and I had to base a lot of what I said on what I found online. So if you're someone who's into the battletech in either traditional tabletop or video game format, make sure not to skip it, as it's apparently a great game. If you're not, however, but are still curious what it's all about, then perhaps it's worth to give it a chance, cause I will never be able to properly explain all the intricacies when not being very intimate with the game myself. Doesn't it sound weirdly spicy? I mean, it's as if I was taking all the other games on dates, you know, a movie and a dinner kind of a date, and if I'm lucky, they might even let me play them at the end of the night. Let me first tell you what Myst III Exile is, and then a little bit about its story. It is terribly convoluted if you've not dabbled in the earlier games, and that's why I'd like to make a distinction between the game here and its plot. So, Myst III Exile is a first-person perspective fantasy point-and-click adventure and a follow-up to earlier Riven and First Myst. It's a game in a series well known for their deep, lore-heavy storylines and incredibly challenging puzzles. It's worth noting though that these puzzles are always rooted in logic and never of the trial and error or guesswork kind. So even if they're demanding, when you do eventually figure them out, they feel incredibly rewarding. Additionally, many of them are based around different unique machines or objects that have to be manipulated in a precise way. First-person perspective and beautifully pre-rendered graphics were staples of the Myst series, allowing you to get lost in their world and feel as if you were really in these magical locations tackling mind-bending problems. Myst III goes a step further than the previous ones did, adding a full 360 degrees views for all the locations that you can visit, expanding on the feeling of being then and there. So with that out of the way, let me tackle the story, or at least try. But to do that, we need to have a word or two about how it all started. In Myst, Atrus was this creator of magical worlds, and he did so within the books, on pages of which he molded them into realities not unlike ours. He's made more of them than you can ever count. I could, but I'm busy sitting and thinking. Well, talking, but mainly thinking. Anyway, Atrus had a wife Catherine, and they had two sons, Cyrus and Achnar. These sons sadly lacked Atrus' understanding of the world and decency, and went on a destruction spree around some of the worlds that he created. So, seeing no other choice, Atrus had to leave them imprisoned in his books forever. You know, for the betterment of all the other worlds that they've not destroyed yet. The damage was done though, and there are consequences. Namely, a man named Savagereau appeared seemingly out of nowhere, seeking revenge on Atrus because his sons destroyed his world. Now, you may be wondering that if Atrus created all of these worlds, the one that Savagereau comes from included, doesn't that make him their god? I mean, he did brought all of them into existence after all, and by extension of that, aren't his sons gods too? Or at least demigods? Tough questions, but the answers are rather simple. At least from where I'm standing. Well, sitting. I'm actually sitting now. I believe that it's irrelevant. Him, them, everyone who's responsible for the creation of these book-bound worlds may be in fact gods, but it doesn't mean that the gods shouldn't be responsible for the deeds and pay for the mistakes. And that's Savagereau's point too. So he steals Relesham, a book that Atrus created as a world for his own people, and sets a trap, nay, a teaching yet punishing quest for Atrus to go through, and learn from his mistakes and possibly pay the consequences. And it requires going through 3 different ages, a worlds of Savagereau's creation if you will. Voltanic, which is this industrial type of the world, Amateria, a theme park inspired location, and finally Edana, a full of life garden where many plants and animals grow and flourish. So being the busy godlike person that Atrus is, he once again asks you, the player, for your help in solving all 3 of the ages and stopping Savagereau. And this is where my talking about the plot that will expand into this teaching story ends and the game begins. Have you ever wanted to build your own castle, to prepare its defenses and set it up to become the biggest, coolest and most fly castle that there ever was? Well, I'm gonna assume that you said yes, cause otherwise this whole intro would make no sense. So Stronghold will let you do just that, and in style no less. It's a settlement, or well, stronghold simulation and RTS mixture, and a very unique concept in the sea of otherwise rather samey games in the genre. In each of the genres really. If you played much earlier Castles and Castles 2 games from the early 90s, you will more or less know what to expect from Stronghold. The difference here is the processing power of computers that we had in 2001 and how much more it allowed us to achieve. And let me tell you, it was a lot. Stronghold is basically a balancing act type of a game in which you have to find a suitable middle ground between warfare and economics. You have to build a castle, set up taxes, chop down trees, erect other supporting buildings like a hall, granary and stockpile to name a few, and feed your peasants. You know, do everything you'd have to do as a medieval ruler of such a magnificent structure. It's definitely a slower and more managerial part of the game, and one that most would probably consider to be just an add-on to the Warfare one. Warfare, which will see you do both capture and defend castles, depending on your chosen game mode. Now this is fun, and take it from me, so someone who cares very little for traditional RTSs. It gives you a lot of units that you can use in both, offense and defense. Archers are fast and have a long range but are practically useless in close quarters. Swordsmen are heavy armored tanks of the time and can soak up a lot of damage, including from arrows, but they're painfully slow. Engineers can build and operate siege engines of various kinds, so catapults, rams, siege towers and so on, or even carry pots of hot oil in defense to rain molten fiery plasma deaths on the armies storming the walls, but their use outside of these machines is basically non-existent. I mean, there are also many others like crossbowmen, pikemen, macemen and whatever, and they all have their strong and weak sides and best use case scenarios. It doesn't take long to figure out where they fit best, and it's pretty rewarding to use your keen knowledge and strategy to beat a stronger opponent when you do. Figure out the best use of your armies, that is. Battles feel as if they were more macro rather than micro-scale managed, and the number of available commands that you can issue to your armies is rather limited, which is kind of a double-edged sword really, as some will find it fresh and interesting, while others will consider it simplistic and limiting. While Stronghold is not a perfect game, it's a very good one, and there's not much bad that can be said about it. I have 3 observations though, and I'd like to share them with you if you don't mind. They're the things that I find to be lacking or that would be better if done differently. For one, when fire spreads onto the buildings, your citizens will walk into them as if they never saw that fire, then catch on fire themselves and die soon after. It's just silly and was probably an easy fix even if it was never implemented. For 2, if given a time and a lot of units on the task, castle walls can be torn down even by the use of melee weapons, which is just all kinds of stupid if you think about it. And finally, if you want a defending site and building up your castle to prepare for the siege, you cannot place your walls too close to where the enemy units will spawn. Or actually you can, and that's the problem. Because when you're building the walls up, the game will not tell you when you've crossed that magical and invisible border it imagined for itself and will just let you carry on. And then, when the siege starts, that part of the wall that was, let's say, out of bounds just disappears, leaving you with an entirely open castle and a big problem to solve. It's just bad game design and the only real terrible choice on the dev side. All in all, Stronghold is a fantastic title and one worth checking out whether you're a fan of RTS and settlement building games or not. Stunt GP is an arcade RC cars racer and a pretty fun game at that. I'm not sure how many kids these days play with RC cars, perhaps none, because why would they barely ever go outside. But when I was a kid, these were very popular and everyone wanted one. Or 2, or 3, or more. Point is, everyone wanted an RC car, and if that was not in the cards, then at least to get to play with one. While it most likely would be very difficult to pull off kids from their phone screens or tablets these days, I'm pretty sure that in 2001 there were still some that would have a lot of fun with one of these toys. And Stunt GP is a game for those who for whatever the reason couldn't get one. I gotta admit that RC car races are not my favorite offshoot of the genre, but this one's actually pretty sweet. I mean, it's not Revolt, let's not kid ourselves here, but hardly anything can be as spectacular. It's not that far off though, and even has few features that Revolt didn't. Like the ability to mix and match parts for the cars, upgrading them with better tires, suspension, frame brakes, batteries and the likes, and with a total of over 1000 different combinations of components, there's a lot to choose from. There are overall 16 different cars split in 3 categories to choose from, described by few unique to them stats, and a selection of 24 colorful tracks, covered in ramps, loops and other fun stuff. I mean, there is stunt in the game title, so you kinda have to expect the game to feature this in abundance. And for the most part, all the stunts that you get to perform feel very rewarding and look pretty cool. And especially that the driving physics is pretty good too. All the surfaces, be it plastic, sand or whatever else, seem to react to your car as you'd expect, and the cars themselves feel like real toys, which is a very nice touch. You can easily tell that they're not very heavy and they react to on-track situations realistically as well, which is not something you'd expect from a small RC cars racer, so it was a rather pleasant surprise. Overall, Stunt GP is a lot of fun and I would most definitely recommend it to anyone who enjoys arcade races, RC cars or has fond memories of micro machines. 1993's Arabian Nights was a fantastic Amiga action platformer that was not only a blast, but also featured numerous unique and fun to figure out design choices and mechanics. This, 2001's third-person action adventure, is not. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad game, not the point I'm trying to make here, but it's just not very good either. There were countless other choices on the market in 2001 and most of them were just better. In terms of level design, presentation, gameplay mechanics, everything really. Arabian Nights is set in the ancient Middle East and as such you can really feel that you're there. The architecture and all the decorations, all of that fit perfectly and look as if it was taken straight from Prince of Persia. And while it's obviously not, it's clear that the game was based on Prince of Persia 3D, which it would be fine if it was a great game and an example to set for other similar titles. But as it stands, Prince of Persia 3D is also not great. Well, bit better than Arabian Nights, but not enough to become a worthy base for any other game to lean on. I know that I've been dropping bricks on both games for a while now, even if they're not terrible at all, just average, but I feel that there's one thing that's worth mentioning and something that could definitely sway your opinion about them if it was 2001. Well, on one of them at least. Arabian Nights originally released as a budget title and for less than a half price of what other games costed. And with such a symbolic price tag back then, its score should get at least a single bump up. Anyway, I'm sure you're wondering what it's all about. Why are you running around fighting with buddies and occasionally solving simple puzzles? Well, as it turns out, Sultan's seeds were very strong. Like so strong, you wouldn't believe. I mean, if he really wanted to, he could have fathered half of the nation, but he didn't, and 5 daughters is all he has. They're quintuplets though, so you know, it's perhaps not the entire nation, but it's not nothing. As most fathers, he loves his daughters dearly, so when they all suddenly and unexpectedly disappear on the eve of their 21st birthday, he is devastated. And understandably so. I mean, I tremble from an uncontrollable fear like an alcoholic at the dusk hours of the day whenever I can't find my cat for 5 minutes. So I can only imagine what terror having your daughters disappear may cause. So Sultan calls for his best and most trusted warrior, you, and sends you to get them back. The enemies are aplenty and quite varied in Arabian Nights, often armed too, and you're left to deal with them all by yourself. You can use over 30 different martial arts moves against them, a few weapons and even 4 spells. Other than that, same as in other similar games, you can run, jump, climb ladders, ropes, walk tightrope and fly on a magic carpet. Well, I suppose you can't fly on a magic carpet in all games, but you know what I mean. There's a lot you can do and you should. Do it, that is. And the overall point here is, if you don't mind your games being just average, this one's not that bad. Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds is a real-time strategy set in the world of everyone's favorite sci-fi universe. Well, everyone but yours truly. I'm definitely on the Star Trek end of the sci-fi spectrum, and I'm proud of it. Strategy saver, you'll know how, what and where to do near instantly in Battlegrounds. I mean, sure, it's unique in more than one way and not only in its theme, but the general mechanics are similar to what you've seen in other titles. Especially that it looks eerily like Age of Empires but in a different clothing. Anyway, Battlegrounds features single-player campaigns, skirmishes and multiplayer battles, and naturally, as it's easy to figure out, it's these last that are the most fun and engaging, given you'll be able to find someone to play it with today, and if the online multiplayer still works, which I'm inclined to doubt, but I've not checked. There are 6 major, well, let's call them civilizations, or better yet sites in the game, and it's Galactic Empire, Rebel Alliance, Wookiees, Gangans, Royal Naboo, and the Trade Federation. And between these, you'll have access to over 300 entirely unique and very in-lore units like Stormtroopers, Jedi Knights, Bounty Hunters, X-Wings, AT-ATs, droids and many more. Each of the sites also have their own story-based campaign composed out of 7 missions and weekend-strong sites, like having better troops or ships or whatever that define their specialties. There are naturally different resources to gather and use in the game and a research tree too. And it's that research that is actually quite fun, as other than unlocking more race specialties, it also grants you access to unit upgrades, and there are a few of these each. Up to 5, I believe. And they're pretty fun as they allow you to customize your units so that they would fit current particular scenario requirements. It's a fun concept and one that works surprisingly well. And I say so someone who doesn't really play RTS games. But if you're a fan of either genre or Star Wars, you're gonna have a lot of fun with this one, and I would wholeheartedly recommend giving it a chance. While I've played and own all mainland Civilization games and probably all games with Sid Meier's name on the box too, this third one is one that I have the least fond memories of, which is odd as it's a rather stellar and fun game. If you're in the whole I'm the god of my people and I will lead them to glory thing. Personally, I'm more of a these are my people and we all suck kind of a gamer, so that's perhaps why. Or because that when it came out, I've been an expat for a good 7 years or so and played less games then than throughout the rest of my life. Despite my ignorance of the game, whatever the reason was for it, it is in fact a pretty fantastic release. Same as all others in the series, it's a turn-based nation-ruling strategy that sees you lead your people to the wealth, knowledge, scientific discoveries and power. Sometimes all of these at once, and sometimes none. It's the first game in the long-running series to introduce meaningful differences between available nations, with each of them having clearly defined strong and weak sides, unique to them units and a type of government that they prefer and that best suits their gameplay style. Along with that came cultural influence, which finally turned series of city-states under one leader that the cities in earlier games felt like into something more resembling a true nation. And especially that the country borders were added to the game, and while it's not a huge difference, it sure as hell felt like it when played. Because your land was finally your land, and not only what belonged to particular satellite cities you've spread around the map. Other than all that, Civilization III is still same old good game in which you lead your tribe from the ancient times throughout all the eras all the way to the future. all the while expanding your sphere of quote-unquote control by building cities, by cultural influence, by researching and implementing new, often game-changing technologies, and by investing in military and using it wisely, in both offense and defense. Taking cities from enemies where you know you can afford to, and protecting your strategic areas against enemy invaders. Each current for its time game of Civilization is fantastic and a hit, and the third was no different. So if you're at all into 4X, both in terms of your trouser size and video games, this one's definitely delivering in heaps. It's worth pointing out though that if you have any other later titles in the Civ series available, there is really no reason to come back to this one. Emperor Battle for Dune is, as you can most likely guess, a real-time strategy and a true successor to original Dune 2. Cause while some would claim that Dune 2000 was all that, I consider it more of a refresh rather than a true follow-up. It's a story-based game too, so it provides pretty decent RTS gameplay. It also serves you tidbits of reason to go where you have to and do what you need to. I mean, not that you ever needed a plot to have fun in an RTS, but whether you did or didn't, you're definitely getting one with Emperor. Other than that, Emperor Battle for Dune features the same three main houses, Atreides, Ordos and Harkonnen, fighting for the spice melange on the planet Arrakis. There are some minor sub-houses in the game too, and they may join or oppose your house during the campaign in your struggle for victory. The typical RTS trifecta of mechanics, so resource gathering, base building / expansion and combat, are a foundation of Emperor's gameplay, and they're probably as polished as you'd hope them to be in a game, which much earlier predecessor was credited with being the first quote-unquote modern entry in the genre. This time, however, your campaign is not just a series of linear missions, and you have access to an overworld map, and you can pick the order of regions you'd like to invade and battle in for yourself. It's a very nice addition, and definitely raises game's replayability. A nice and definitely welcome change to the same old formula of Dune is the long-needed switch into true 3D presentation, which, while definitely not the best in the genre for its time, is still very nice indeed and adds depth to all the units, building as scenery. It may only add to the presentation layer of it all, but while the graphics rarely make or break the game, they can add a lot to the fun factor, and there's no doubt about that. And the fact that all the sub-houses come with their own, often special and unique units, can be a true game changer, making Emperor feel very asymmetric in multiplayer skirmishes, but also quite replayable and unpredictable at the same time. Now, all that said, I don't think I need to mention again in the same video what I think about RTSs. But despite not being much into them, I can definitely appreciate one that's an unquestionable good entry in the genre. And Emperor sure is. Evil Twin Cyprien's Chronicles is a special game in many ways. Kinda like soup. Soup can be special in many ways too. It can be super tasty, it can leave you feeling full, it can be too salty or too spicy or even downright bad tasting. In some cases it can help you battle cold or hangover too. Though that last is questionable, and from my experience and when having a bit too much to drink when I was younger, no food ever helped me deal with it. And all it did is come out the same way it entered, sooner or later. Today I know two things. Not to drink too much and eat before, during and after drinking to have that solid base for all the alcohol to digest. And while all I said may seem random and you may question my sanity, I've not said it for no reason. Cause Evil Twin is like that soup. It's beautiful, incredibly atmospheric in terms of its sound and graphical design game, and for the time of its release, it felt like no other 3D action platformer. It's also this rather dark story, sending you, a kid no less, on a rescue mission spread over 8 unique islands, each with its own style, and overall offering over 70 levels of action platforming. You will be seeking your friends and your teddy bear, but also most importantly, your inner self. And not many games in the genre tried going for the deep and thought-provoking, usually focusing on a lot of colors and cute design. The presentation and theme are both complemented by an assortment of different creatures, good and bad, all of which are appropriately so weird, twisted and bizarre. Sometimes all of these at once. The devs spared no attention to detail, so all of these fit together nicely and present you with a uniformly creepy and captivating world. But you know what? Not all soups are great. And Evil Twin has some of its odd aftertastes and funky aromas too. And while for most they won't be game breakers, for some they will reduce it into unplayable mess. And the unfitting spices in question are the camera work, controls and direction. So the camera moves in a way that's not always predictable and will more than once position itself at such an odd angle that you'll feel as if you were fighting against the game as much as you are against the enemies. The controls are perhaps not the worst I've seen, but they sure can feel unresponsive and imprecise from time to time too, and in a game when you do a lot of jumping on platforms, often over pits of dark emptiness, it's a bit annoying. And finally, the direction, or lack thereof, especially in some areas where it's not immediately obvious what to do, can lead to some seriously dangerous situations. So, keeping all that in mind, and having eaten many different soups, funny enough very few with bacon, which I happen to love with the passion of a pig cannibal, I found Evil Twin not to be unplayable or broken. Sure, it's annoying as hell from time to time, and can be needlessly demanding at some points too, but being as original as it is, I feel that it's worth a taste, a sip if you will, and especially if you're a fan of its by 2001 rather popular genre. I'm gonna be honest here with you guys and tell you that I feel that I will only do one more of these 2001 gaming videos, if any, and will look into moving into 2002 games soon. It's not that I covered them all, cause that would require many more episodes, but I think I've spoken about a grand majority of the most important and well-known games that I wanted to cover for it, and I also wanna leave some of these forgotten treasures from the year for that other series of mine. You know, the one that covers these in particular, giving them a bit more coverage. Still, I hope that you liked today's video, and if you did, make sure to give that thumbs up button a fine rub. And if you wanna stay up to date and always be notified about my new releases, remember to hit subscribe and that bell down there too. It's the only way to make sure that YouTube will not serve you another of those TikTok React videos instead of what I do. And finally, make sure to eat good food, sleep well and play games. And I'll talk to you very soon.